Hi 4-H, Miss Hosman here again. I am on chapter 17 of Fablehaven, and right now Kendra has just escaped the Forgotten Chapel alone because remember, she has not used any magic, so they can't get her. So this chapter is called A Desperate Gamble. We were trying to figure out at the end of last chapter, what will she do to be able to save Grandma, Grandpa, and Seth? All right, here we go. Dreading nightfall did nothing to prevent it. The sunset diminished and disappeared until Kendra had only the light reflected from half a moon to guide her. The night grew cooler, but not cold. The forest was swathed in a gloomy shadow. Occasionally she heard unsettling sounds, but she never caught sight of what made them. Although she glanced back frequently, the road behind remained as empty as the road ahead. Kendra alternated between jogging and walking. Without landmarks, it was difficult to discern how much ground she was actually covering. The dirt road seemed to stretch on forever. She worried about Grandma Sorensen. Since she had shot Muriel and used Hugo to cripple the imps, there would probably be no protection for Grandma to similar torture. Kendra began to wish she had accepted Muriel's invitation to stay at the church with her family. The guilt of being the only escapee was almost too much to bear. It was hard to calculate the passage of time. The night wore on, as endless as the road. The moon gradually migrated across the sky, or was it the road changing direction? Kendra felt certain she had been on the road for hours when she reached an open area. The moonlight showed a scant trail branching away from the road. It ran toward a tall, shadowy hedge. Oh, the pond with the gazebos! Finally, a landmark. She could not be more than half an hour from the house, and there was still no hint of dawn. How long before Bahamut would be set free? Maybe the demon was already on the loose. Would she know when it happened, or would she not find out until she was mobbed by monsters? Kendra rubbed her eyes. She felt weary. Her legs did not want to go any farther. She noticed that she was very hungry. She stopped and stretched for a minute. Then she started jogging. Could she run the rest of the way? It wasn't that far. As she passed the meager trail branching from the road, Kendra skidded to a halt. A new thought had occurred to her, inspired by the irregular hedge looming off to the side of the road. The Fairy Queen had a shrine on the island in the middle of the pond. Wasn't she supposed to be the most powerful person in all the fairy world? Maybe Kendra could try asking her for help. Kendra folded her arms. She knew so little about the Fairy Queen. Apart from hearing that the queen was powerful, she had heard only that to set foot on her island meant certain death. Some guy had tried it and turned into dandelion seeds. But why was he trying it? Kendra did not think she had been given a specific reason, just that he had a desperate need. But the fact that he had tried meant he might succeed. Maybe if he just didn't have a good enough reason. Kendra considered her need. Her grandparents and her brother were about to be killed, and Fablehaven was about ready to be destroyed. That would be bad for the fairies too, wouldn't it? Or would the fairies not care? Maybe they would just go elsewhere. Indecisive, Kendra stared at the faint trail. What weapon did she expect to find at the house? Probably nothing. So she would most likely end up crashing through the gate or climbing it to get away before Bahamut and Muriel caught up and finished her off. And her family would die. But this Fairy Queen idea might work. If the queen was so powerful, she would be able to stop Muriel and maybe even Bahamut. Kendra needed an ally. Despite her noble intentions, she could not see any way she could succeed on her own. Kendra had felt a new sensation inside ever since the idea had popped into her head. The feeling was so unexpected that it took a moment to recognize it as hope. There were no combination locks in the way. She just had to throw herself at the mercy of an all-powerful being and plead for her family. What was the worst that could happen? Death, but on her terms. No bloodthirsty imps, no witches, no demons, just a big poof of dandelion fluff. What was worse? What was the worst thing that could happen? Was this really the best possibility? The Fairy Queen could turn Muriel into dandelion seeds and rescue Kendra's family. Kendra started down the trail. She felt butterflies in her stomach. It was an encouraging kind of nervousness, much preferable to the dread of certain failure. She started running. No crawling under the hedge this time. The path led to an archway. Kendra ran under the archway and onto the manicured lawn beyond. By moonlight, the whitewashed pavilions and boardwalk were even more picturesque than during the day. Kendra really could envision the Fairy Queen living on the island at the center of the tranquil pond. Of course, the queen didn't actually live there. It was just a shrine. Kendra would have to go petition her and hope that the queen would actually respond. Getting to the island would be the first challenge. The pond was full of naiads who liked to drown people, which meant she needed a sturdy boat. Kendra hurried across the lawn towards the nearest gazebo. She tried to ignore the shifting shadows she saw ahead, various creatures ducking out of sight. Anticipating what she was about to attempt, Kendra felt like her intestines were caught in an egg beater. She forced away all fear. Would Grandpa turn and flee? Would Grandma? Would Seth? Or would they try the best to save her? She charged up the steps of the nearest pavilion and started running along the boardwalk. Her shoes pounded noisily against the boards, defying the silence. She saw her destination, the boathouse, 3 gazebos away. The surface of the lake was a black mirror reflecting the moonlight. A few twinkling fairies hovered just above the water. Otherwise, there was absolutely no sign of life. Kendra reached the pavilion attached to the small pier. She dashed down the steps and out onto the quay. She reached the boathouse and tried the door. Just like before, it was locked. The door was not big, but it looked sturdy. Kendra kicked it hard. The impact jolted up the length of her leg, making her wince. She rammed the door with her shoulder, again hurting herself instead of the door. Kendra stepped back. The boathouse was basically a large shed floating on the water. It had no windows. She hoped it still had boats inside. If it did, they would be sitting in the water, protected by the walls and the roof, and no floor. If she jumped into the lake, she could surface inside the boathouse and climb into the boat. She studied the water. The black reflective surface was impenetrable. There could be hundreds of naiads waiting in the ambush, or none. It was impossible to tell. The whole plan would be pointless if she drowned before reaching the island. Based on what she had heard from Lena, there would be naiads eagerly awaiting for her to get near the water. Jumping in would be suicide. She sat down and started bucking the door with both feet, the same method Seth had used to break into the barn. She made a lot of noise, but it didn't seem to be harming the door at all. Kicking harder only made her legs hurt more. She needed a tool, or a key, or maybe some dynamite. Kendra ran back up the pavilion, searching for something that she could use to pry the door open. She saw nothing. If only there was a sledgehammer lying around. She tried to calm herself. She had to think. Maybe if she just kept pounding, the door would eventually give. Sort of like erosion? But it hadn't budged yet, and she didn't have all night. There had to be a smarter solution. What did she have to work with? Nothing. Nothing but a few shadowy creatures who ducked out of sight at her approach. "Okay, listen up," she shouted. "I know you can hear me. I have got to get inside the boathouse. A witch is setting Bahamut free, and all of Fablehaven is going to be destroyed. I'm not asking for anybody to stick their necks out. I just need someone to beat down the boathouse door. My grandfather is the caretaker here, and I will give you full permission. I'm going to turn my back and close my eyes. When I hear the door break, I'll wait 10 seconds before I turn back around." Kendra turned around and closed her eyes. She heard nothing. "Anytime, just smash down the door. I promise I won't look." She heard a gentle splash and a tinkling sound. "Okay, sounds like we've got a taker. Just break down the door." She heard nothing. She suddenly realized that something could have emerged from the water and be sneaking up behind her. Unable to resist, she turned and peeked. No dripping creatures were in sight. All was quiet. There were ripples on the previously glassy pond, and lying on the dock near the boathouse was a key. Kendra rushed down the stairs and picked up the key. It was wet, corroded, and a little slimy. Longer than a regular key, it looked old-fashioned. Wiping it against her shirt, she carried the key into the boathouse and inserted it into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. She turned it, and the door swung inward. Kendra shivered. The implications were disturbing. Apparently, the naiad tossed her the key. They wanted her out on the water. With only the moonlight seeping in through the door to provide illumination, the boathouse was very dim. Squinting, Kendra could see 3 boats tied to the narrow pier. 2 large rowboats, one slightly broader than the other, and a smaller paddle boat. The paddle boat was the kind with the bicycle pedals. Kendra had ridden once of those in the park at the lake. On one wall hung several oars of varying length. Near the door were a crank and a lever. Kendra tried to turn the crank, but it would not move. She pulled the lever, and nothing happened. She tried the crank again, and this time it turned. A sliding door on the opposite side of the boathouse from the dock began to open, letting in more light. Kendra kept cranking, relieved that she would be able to paddle the boat directly into the boathouse onto the pond. Standing in the gloom of the boathouse, staring out to the open door at the pond, Kendra began to doubt. She felt nauseated with fear. Was she really prepared to go to her death, to have naiads drown her, or fall victim to a spell protecting the Forbidden Island? Grandma and Grandpa Sorensen were resourceful. They might have already escaped. Was she doing this for nothing? Kendra remembered an occasion 3 years ago at a community pool. She had desperately wanted to jump off the high dive. Her mom had warned her that it was higher than it looked, but nothing could dissuade her. Many kids were jumping off of it, several her age or younger. She stood in line at the base of the ladder. When her turn came, she started climbing, amazed at how much higher she seemed with each step. When she arrived at the top, she felt like she was standing on a skyscraper. She wanted to turn back, but all the kids in line would know that she was scared. Plus, her parents were watching. She walked forward along the diving board. There was a slight breeze. She wondered if the people on the ground could feel it. When she approached the end of the board, she stared down at the rippling water. She could see all the way to the bottom of the pool. Jumping no longer seemed like a fun thing to do. Realizing that the longer she hesitated, the more attention she would draw. So she quickly turned around and descended the ladder, trying to avoid contact with the people waiting at the line at the bottom. She had not been up at the high dive since. In fact, she rarely ever took any type of risk. Once again, she was standing on the brink of something frightening, but this was different. Jumping off a high dive or riding a roller coaster with multiple loops or passing a note to Scott Thomas, those were all voluntary thrills. There was no real consequence to avoiding the risk. In her current situation, her family would probably die if she failed to act. She had to stand by her previous decision and carry out her plan regardless of the consequences. Kendra considered the oars. She had never rowed a boat and could easily picture herself floundering, especially if the nasty naiads were giving her a hard time. She examined the paddle boat. Designed for a single passenger, it was wider than it needed to be, presumably for additional stability. The childish craft was not nearly as big as the rowboats, and she would be close to the water, but at least Kendra thought she could maneuver it. Kendra sighed. Kneeling, she untied the little boat, tossing the slender rope onto the seat. The paddle boat wobbled when she stepped aboard, and she had to crouch and use her hands to avoid falling into the water. The bottom of the novelty craft was completely closed, which meant nothing could grab at her feet. After getting situated, Kendra sat facing the dock. There was a steering wheel to control lateral movement. Turning the wheel all the way to one side, she pedaled backwards and slid away from the dock. Cranking the wheel the other way, she started pedaling forward. The boat quietly slid out of the boathouse. Ripples radiated out from underneath the paddle boat as she steered toward the island, pedaling briskly. The island was not far, maybe 80 yards. The paddle boat would move steadily closer to her destination until it started moving away from the island. She pedaled harder, but the boat kept sliding diagonally backward. Something was towing her. The boat began to spin. Turning the wheel and paddling did nothing. Then the boat suddenly tilted precariously to one side. Something was trying to tip her. What could that be? Kendra leaned to prevent the boat from capsizing, and the boat abruptly rocked the other way. Kendra changed position, counterbalancing desperately. She saw wet fingers holding the side of the boat and slapped at them. The action was rewarded by giggling. The boat began to rotate quickly. "Leave me alone," Kendra demanded. "I have to get to the island." This earned a longer titter from multiple voices. Kendra paddled furiously, but it did no good. She kept spinning and getting hauled in the wrong direction. The naiads started rocking the boat again. Thanks to the low center of gravity, Kendra found that leaning was enough to prevent the boat from capsizing. But the naiads were relentless. They tried to distract her by banging the bottom of the vessel and waving at her. The boat pitched and rocked and spun, and then suddenly the naiads would heave in earnest, trying to catch her off balance. Time after time, Kendra reacted quickly, shifting her weight to spoil their attempts to flip her. It was a stalemate. The naiads did not show themselves. She heard their laughter, glimpsed their hands, but never saw a face. Kendra decided to quit paddling. She was getting nowhere and wasting energy. She resolved to exert herself only to keep the boat from tipping. The attempts grew less frequent. She said nothing and made no response to the taunting giggles, ignored the hands on the side of the boat. She simply leaned as needed when they tried to tip the boat. She was getting better at it, and they were not able to tilt it as much. The attempt stopped. After about a minute of no activity, Kendra started paddling toward the island. Her progress was soon halted. She quit paddling immediately, and the naiads spun her and rocked her some more. She waited. After another minute of tranquility, she paddled again, and then they pulled her away, but less eagerly. She sensed them giving up and getting bored. On her 8th try using this technique, the naiads apparently lost interest. The island grew closer. 20 yards, 10 yards. She expected them to stop her at the last moment, but they didn't. The front of her paddleboat scraped against the shore. Everything remained still. The moment of truth had arrived. When she set foot on the island, she would either transform into a cloud of dandelion fluff and drift away, or she wouldn't. Almost indifferent at this point, Kendra leaped out of the boat and landed on the shore. There did not seem to be anything magical or anything special about it, and she did not turn into a cloud of seeds. There was, however, a barrage of laughter from behind her. Kendra whirled in time to see her paddleboat drifting away from the island. It was already too late to do anything without jumping into the water. She slapped herself onto the forehead with the heel of her hand. The naiads had not given up. They were just trying a different strategy. She had been so distracted by the prospect of becoming dandelion fluff that she had not hauled the boat out of the water as she should have. She could have at least kept hold of the rope. So now she's trapped on the island. Well, one more favor to ask the Fairy Queen. The island was not large. It took only about 70 paces for Kendra to walk to the edge of it. Her tour of the perimeter revealed nothing interesting. The shrine was probably near the center. Although the island had no trees, it had many shrubs, many taller than Kendra. There were no trails, and pressing through them was irritating. What would the shrine look like? She pictured like a little building, but after crisscrossing the island a few times, she realized that there was no such structure. Maybe she had not turned to dandelion seeds because the island was not real. Maybe the shrine was no longer here. Either way, she was stranded on a tiny island in the middle of a pond full of creatures who wanted to drown her. What would drowning feel like? Would she actually inhale water or just pass out? Or would the demon get her first? Oh, she had come this far. She would have to look again, more carefully. Maybe the shrine was something natural, like a special bush or a stump. She walked around the perimeter of the island again, more slowly this time. She noticed a thin trickle of water. It was strange to find a stream, no matter how small, on such a tiny island. She followed the stream toward the center of the island until she found a place where it came bubbling out of the ground. There, at the source of the spring, was a 2-inch tall statue of a fairy, finely carved. It rested on a white pedestal and added a few more inches to its height. A small silver bowl sat in front of it. Of course, fairies were tiny. It made sense that the shrine would be miniature as well. Kendra fell to her knees beside the spring, directly in front of the small figurine. The night was very still. Looking to the sky, Kendra noticed that the eastern horizon was turning purple. Night was coming to an end. All Kendra could think about was pour her heart out to this in sincerity to the Fairy Queen. Hello, Fairy Queen. Thank you for letting me visit you without changing me into dandelion seeds. Kendra swallowed. This felt weird, talking to a really tiny statue. There was nothing special about it. If you could help me, I really need it. A witch named Muriel is about to set free a demon named Bahamut. The witch has my grandma and grandpa Sorensen prisoner, along with my brother Seth and my friend Lena. If that demon gets out, it will wreck this whole preserve, and there is no way I can stop it from happening without your help. Please, I really love my family, and if I don't do something, the demon is going to... The reality of what she was saying hit her like a great weight and spilled out his tears. For the first time, the fact that Seth was going to die finally fully entered her mind. She thought of all the moments with him, both endearing and annoying, and realized that there would be no more of either. She shook with sobs. Her hot tears streamed down her cheeks. She let them come. She needed the release to stop trying to suppress the horror of it all. The tears she had shed while fleeing the forgotten chapel had been of shock and terror. These were tears of realization. Tears slid down her chin and plopped into the silver bowl. Her breathing came in ragged gasps between sobs. Please help me, she finally managed. A breeze drifted over the island. It smelled of rich soil and new blossoms, with just a little hint of sea. Her crying began to subside, and Kendra brushed the tears from her cheeks and wiped her nose on her sleeve. She sniffed, amazed at how swiftly congested she could be. The miniature statue was wet. Had she cried on it? No, water was seeping from her eyes, trickling into the silver bowl. The air stirred again with the same smell. Kendra sensed a presence. She was no longer alone. I accept your offering and join you in weeping. The words were not audible, but they struck her mind with such a forceful impression that Kendra gasped. She had never experienced anything similar. Clear fluid continued to leak from the statue onto the bowl. From tears, milk, and blood, devise an elixir, and my handmaidens will attend you. The tears were obvious. All Kendra could picture was Viola for milk. Whose blood? Her own? The cows? The handmaidens? Had to be the fairies. Wait, what do I do, Kendra asked. How do I get off the island? In reply, the wind stirred for a moment and then gusted. Pleasant aromas vanished. The little statue no longer wept. The presence had departed. Kendra picked up the bowl, about the size of her palm, and it was nearly a third of the way full. She had hoped the Fairy Queen resolved this situation for her. Instead, she apparently had shown her to resolve the problem herself. The telepathic message felt as precise as spoken words. Her family was still in danger, but the spark of hope was now aflame. How would she get off the island? Rising, Kendra walked to the shore. Unbelievably, the paddle boat was drifting in her direction. It steadily approached until reaching the island. Kendra stepped in the boat and pulled away from the shore spontaneously, turned her around, and started towards the little white pier. Kendra did nothing. She didn't even paddle. She was afraid to do anything because she thought she might disrupt the progress to the pier. She held the bowl in her lap, careful not to spill a drop. Then she saw it. A dark figure standing on the pier, awaiting her return. A puppet the size of a man. Mendingo. Her throat constricted with fear. She had worked magic on the island. Getting the tears from the statue, that was magic, right? Her protected status was finished, and Mendingo had come to apprehend her. Can you drop me off somewhere else? She asked. The boat moved steadily forward. What would she do? Even if they dropped her off elsewhere, Mendingo would just follow. The boat paddled 20 yards from the pier, then 10. She had to protect the contents of her bowl, and she could not let Mendingo hold her away. But how could she stop him? The paddle boat brushed against the pier, coming to stop alongside it. Mendingo made no move to grab her. He seemed to be waiting for her to disembark. Kendra set the bowl on the pier and stood up, noticing that the boat was being held steady. When she stepped onto the pier, Mendingo moved forward, but as before, he couldn't seem to grab her. He stood with both arms half raised, fingers fluttering. Kendra picked up the bowl and walked around the lumberjack. Mendingo followed her on the edge of the pier. Why would Muriel have sent Mendingo after her if it couldn't seize her? Did Muriel know she communed with the Fairy Queen? If so, the puppet sure moved quickly, and his being there was probably precautionary. This problem seemed to be severe. Evidently, Kendra had not actually worked magic on the island. She had merely collected an ingredient. But in concocting the elixir, the Fairy Queen described it and giving it to the fairy, she would certainly be performing magic. The moment her protected status ended, Mendingo would be on her. That was not an option. Kendra set the silver bowl on the steps leading up to the gazebo. Then she turned and confronted Mendingo. The puppet was more than half a head taller than her. I think you work like Hugo. You have no brain and just do what you're told. Is that right, Mendingo? The lumberjack stood still. Kendra tried not to get creeped out. I have a feeling you won't obey me, but it's worth a try. Mendingo, go climb a tree and sit up there forever. Mendingo stood motionless. Kendra walked straight at him. He was trying to lift his arms to grab her, but was unable to carry out the intention. Standing close to him, she reached out a tentative finger and touched his wooden torso. He did not react, except to continue struggling against whatever force prevented him from seizing her. You can't touch me. I haven't done anything mean or used any magic, but I can touch you. She gently stroked both his arms beneath his shoulders. The lumberjack jittered with effort to try to grasp her. Want to see my second decisive move of the night? She asked. Mendingo quivered, hooks jingling, but remaining powerless to take hold of Kendra. Unconsciously biting her lower lip, she grabbed both arms below the shoulders, unhooked them, and dashed away from the lumberjack. She heard the overgrown puppet chasing her as he raced to the edge of the pond and hurled the wooden arms into the water. So she is throwing his arms into the water. I wonder if this is a good idea. Something clipped Kendra's shoulder and sent her spinning to the ground. A crushing force pressed against her back, pinning her down. She could hardly breathe. Craning her neck, she saw Mendingo looming over her, using his foot to put her in place. How could a creature that looked so flimsy be so strong? The spot where he had kicked her stung deep. It would certainly bruise. Kendra reached for his other leg, hoping to unhook the shin, but the puppet danced out of reach. For a moment, Mendingo appeared indecisive. Kendra began to roll away in case he charged and tried to kick her again, if she could just unhook a leg. Instead, Mendingo hurried to the pier. Both his arms were floating in the water. One had almost drifted within reach of the pier. Mendingo crouched, balancing carefully on one foot, and stretched out a leg towards the nearest arm. Just as his toes made contact, a white hand shot out of the water and seized Mendingo by the ankle, yanking him into the pond with a splash. Kendra waited, holding her breath as she watched. The lumberjack did not resurface. Ooh, thanks to those naiads. She dashed back to the steps and picked up the bowl. Kendra dared not run while holding the tears. Instead, she walked swiftly, careful not to waste any of her precious cargo. She walked across the lawn, through the arch, down the path, and onto the road. Stars continued to fade in the eastern sky. Kendra hurried along the road. She was pretty sure her sheltered status was at an end. But if mischief had to be done, at least it felt worthwhile. She had a feeling it would not be her final mischievous act of the night. And that is the end of chapter 17. Our next chapter is called Bahamut. So we'll find out what happens.